Hey folks, we're just waiting for a few people to come in. Thanks for joining us. Hey, thank you for joining us. Cool. Hey, Julie. I see you. Cool. We're super excited for this event to get started, and hey, Malcolm, and as more folks come in, I'm just really thrilled to have this event and partner with an amazing organization, the Asian American Feminist Collective. By the way, I'm Jamie Swift. I am the executive director of Black Women Radicals, and if you don't know who we are a Black feminist advocacy organization dedicated to uplifting Black women and non-binary folks and gender non-conforming folks activism around the world. With everything going on with COVID, I think it's important to have these conversations about what's going on in our world and most importantly, how we can build solidarity together. We see the ravages of white capitalist supremacy and patriarchy, how they've divided communities, Black communities across the diaspora, and also communities of color. And so I think this is so important to have. On Tuesday, Black Women Radicals had a Zoom event on Black feminist perspectives on COVID-19. And we got to see Black feminist and actually womanist perspectives as well about what was going on. And I think in terms of Black and Asian solidarities, we see that there's a growth of anti-Asian sentiments, anti-Black sentiments, anti-Black violence in terms of access to health, but also too, we have to talk about these historical tensions that have and are manifested in our communities, right? We can't skirt around that as radicals. And so I'm super excited to talk to folks from the Asian American Feminist Collective who do such dope work in uplifting a radical Asian American feminist perspective. So before we get started, I would like to say some ground rules. This is a safe space. So we do not accept any racism, homophobia, sexism, transphobia, xenophobia, like I said, any sort of isms that take away from the sanctity of this conversation, right? Because as radicals, we need to address certain issues and we have to build community. I think that is definitely a Black feminist practice. So let's get started. Super excited to have Rachel be the first participant that we have. So let me find Rachel, who is going to be speaking from the Asian American Feminist Collective's IG handle. Let's see, we're just waiting for Rachel. Hey, Rachel. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes,
How
can
are
you
you?
hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How are
Hi,
you doing?
Jamie. I'm okay. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. I've been like waiting for this talk all day. I'm super excited. You know what I mean? So, yeah, do you mind just telling everyone a little bit about yourself and what gives you joy right now?
Sure. Anyway, thank you also for having us today, Jamie. I'm Rachel Kuo. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the co-leaders of the Asian American Feminist Collective. And this is what's giving me joy right now. This little puppy friend, Kirby.
So cute. So adorable. Yeah. So I guess what's giving me joy too a little bit is just reading and reading a lot. I love to read, so that's it. It's not as cute as what you have, but
Yeah.
just it's just some joy that gets me
Yeah.
going. And talking to my family, even though we're apart. But I would like to really get into talking about radical feminist perspectives. Like I said on Tuesday, BWR Black and Radicals had an event on Black feminist perspectives on COVID and womanist perspectives. And so, in terms of Black and Asian solid Black and Asian feminist solidarities. What can we talk about in terms of that, and why is it important to look back at that history? Because many folks don't even know it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just so excited too to have this conversation with you and think about the kind of feminist world building that we can do together, and also later probably get your book recs on things that you're reading right now. But something that has been coming up for me a lot too has been people talking about, right, like that how this pandemic has really created like or revealed like all the ways that our society is broken and what are the ways that we can build anew. And I think this kind of pathway to building anew is something that we really have to do together, and also look to our histories to think about how we can do that. And something reflecting on our earlier formation as the Asian American Feminist Collective, in our first scene, we really talk about how, as we came together as a collective, we were really indebted to Black feminist thought and third world feminist movements. And so we like thought a lot about the groundwork that was laid by the Combahee River Collective in 1977. And someone who really resonates a lot with me is Margot Okazawa Ray. And she really talks about how her family history emerges from US occupation in Japan, and how this personal history is really connected to her work on transnational and domestic struggles against like militarism and imperialism. So really thinking about how we bring our histories like to this feminist work and this world building that we're doing.
Definitely. Yeah. I actually had a interview with Dr. Margot Okasawa Ray, and she's absolutely brilliant. And in terms of, and also talking about her identities as being Black and Asian as well, and then also her formidable activism in the Combahee River Collective. But what I'll say is, who pushed me to even have an event like this, are elder Black feminists, or our elder Black feminists. And I was speaking with Erica Huggins, and she asked me, why, Jamie, and also Barbara Smith, and like, why is there hesitancy in terms of cross-racial solidarities? Why do you think that? Why do you think there's issues in terms of that? And as Erica Huggins with the Black Panther Party and Barbara Smith as with the Combahee River Collective, you can see and you can read how they organized and did coalition building across races, but with like-minded radical feminists. And I think that's important too, to talk about, not some, willy-nilly progressivism or liberalism. And I hate to be like that, but it's true. But how do we, as radicals, if we say we're radicals, really address these issues that are between us, but also discuss the ways that white supremacy and amongst things have ravaged our communities. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that reflection too, because I think what you're also really helping me reflect on, right, is like this really long-term radical movement work. And so, yes, like we're in this moment of crisis and things feel so urgent, right? And this conversation feels urgent, but that there's like this longer past and this future that as we're like radicals, like being and developing like a relationship of coalition, like together, like the politics of that, and beginning to like really think about building slowly and building together, in order to kind of sustain these solidarities moving forward.
Definitely. And I would just like to emphasize your point and build off on some Black feminists who, particularly Audre Lorde. Many people don't know about Audre Lorde and how she went to Auckland, New Zealand, and wanted to organize with Maori women who were also oppressed. There's I think people forget that about her Pan-Africanism, but also her commitment to radical Black feminist movement building across races, across genders, across all sorts of identities. And I think we really need to start reading a lot more, because the information is out there. But I think we can, as feminists, as a representative of Black women radicals and as a representative of the Asian American Feminist Collective, I know that you have great resources and books too on your website. And if you just wanted to plug any of those books, if you had in mind.
Yeah, I'll plug two, I guess. One that kind of expands on Audre Lorde, who I love, and I think just her essay "Learning from the '60s" is really close to home for me, because like what she's really talking about is like coalition building across difference, and like how do we move away from like letting some people go, like in order for our own liberation, that she's like, no, like we have to think about the ways that this is really interlocked. And so like that essay holds a lot of just depth and meaning for me. And less so like as a specific resource, but I feel I would love to point people towards the history of the Third World Women's Alliance, which really looks again like to this history of being pushing against imperialism, against racism, and against capitalism as this multiracial coalition that emerged as like the Black Women's Liberation Committee, and then in coalition with Asian, Native, Chicana feminists, like building this movement to really resist these systems and to kind of like think about again world building together.
Definitely. And then another thing comes to mind too. I'm sorry it's in this wrapped up like this. It's a collector's item, but this is the Azalea newsletter, Conversations from Third World Lesbian Writers. I don't know if anyone can see it. And everything you said, it's a collective of Black and Asian writers and Latina, Chicana writers came together to lesbians that came together, third world lesbians, to write about their perspectives. And I think that's so important. And I love that essay by Audre Lorde, because she also talks about how we have to uproot homophobia and amongst other things, and sexism and amongst other things in the community, because we can't get free with that. We can't really move forward. And so how can we learn from that time period? How can we learn from now? How can we learn from COVID-19 to move forward? So yeah, this is, the title was Azalea, Conversations with Third World Lesbian Writers. I think one of the writers, her name is Michio Cornell. She was one of the writers in here too. And then also I wanted to just quickly, before we move to Tiffany, because we only have an hour, read a few literature and also movements that have happened between Black feminists and Asian feminists. So I don't know if you wanted to talk about The Bridge Called My Back. That's another one. The Conference of the Women of Asia, 1949, the Bandung Conference, the Afro-Asian People Solidarity Conference, Afro-Asian Women's Conference in Cairo, Egypt, Afro-Asian People Solidarity Organization. There's also an organization that was called the Organization of Women of African and Asian Descent, OWAD, which was led by Olive Morris and Solidarities. So these are just examples. And that one, OWAD, Solidarities and Olive Morris were in London. So we can talk all day.
Yes. No, and I love this genealogy really that you lay out of this coalition building, because I think what's also so helpful about it, and maybe this kind of helps build into as we transition to Tiffany, is that through each of these iterations, right, like there's this recursive move as they're like learning on the movements that came before, their mistakes, right, like some of, like I named the Third World Women's Alliance earlier, and they really grappled with problems of homophobia in their collective, right, and then they had to reform and think about how do we develop a political line that accounts for the queer folks like in our communities. And so I feel like this genealogy that you're laying out is like really people thinking about how do we grapple with the tension, grapple with the conflict, and sit through that together in order to move forward. So I love this genealogy that you gave, and I'll sign off so you can also chat with Tiffany now.
Rachel, you're dope. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 So we're going to talk with Tiffany, who's a great writer, journalist. I actually didn't know when I was talking to Tiffany that she wrote this dope article about anti-blackness in the Asian community. And that's what we're going to be talking about now. So let's get into it. Hey, Tiffany.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Wow, this is unreal. I feel this is my first time doing an IG live, so I'm not used to like having all these comments and seeing all these people. Yeah.
Trust me, like I told you before, I feel like a fossil doing this because I feel so old, like I don't know what I'm doing, but we're here. We're just everyone's participating. But Tiffany, you are a great writer, a journalist, and you've done a lot of work in terms of dissecting and discussing anti-blackness in the Asian community. And I'm really excited to speak with you right now. So yeah, first things first, what's giving you joy right now?
Joy. Wow. You know, I feel like this has been the first time for some reason in my life where I've had a normal sleep schedule. Um, and I don't know, I think it's just maybe I've like given myself permission to or something like that, but I've been sleeping well, and I think that it's like a weird silver lining. Yeah. How about you?
Reading, I don't ever really sleep well, which is a problem.
Mm.
But mainly reading, getting to talk with y'all, getting to build relationships with the Asian American Feminist Collective, and also really knowing that in terms of Black feminist thought and behavior, if Black women have gone through this, we've gone through so many trials, tests, and tribulations. We can keep moving forward. So, and then and building on that, we can continue to work with others who are radicals and um, want to transform this world. Definitely. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, the ministry. Someone mentioned the nap ministry. Yeah, I need to learn from that. I can't do the nap ministry because I can't sleep. But anyway, Tiffany, let's talk about we've Rachel talked about cross-racial, multiracial, or Black and Asian solidarities, right? But I think we have to talk about not so much of the elephant in the room, but there's been systematic and historic and even contemporary anti-Blackness in the Asian community. We see also a rise of anti-Asian, which is always in there historically, but right now with COVID-19, people, particularly in New York, Asian Americans, are afraid to go outside
Mm-hmm.
because everything is going on. So let's get into that, and I just would
Yeah.
love some of your thoughts.
Yeah, let's get into that. Yeah, it's a really interesting time right now because, like you mentioned, there has been this like heightened anti-Asian sentiment and, racism and hate crimes going on. And that's been this very like overt racism that I think some Asian Americans may be experiencing for the first time. But at the same time, the way that we're seeing COVID really impact our communities, it's very clear that there's some racial lines where Black people are experiencing like really the brunt of racist policy, really. And, just like racist systems, which is why the community has been hit the hardest. And, during this time, I feel like we've been wanting to have these conversations about Black and Asian solidarity and like ways that our communities can work together, but that yeah, there always is this elephant in the room, or this issue of anti-Blackness that is kind of always it's very undercurrent, it's always there under. And that there are a lot of people within the Asian American community anyway that really want to deny or ignore that it's an issue, or they get very defensive about it, which is understanding because at this time we're experiencing this racism, and so maybe you're thinking, okay, well, I've been victimized, I'm hurt by racism. It doesn't feel great to feel that turned around and like have to really inspect yourself and like how you're perhaps like a perpetuator of set racism against other communities. So, I think that it's really important to note that wanting to have these conversations is to bridge these gaps and to like build solidarity and build, coalition with one another. And it isn't necessarily trying to villainize any one community, and that, we know that there has been hurt in the past, but that it doesn't mean that we're completely ignoring all of that in order to like talk about or center someone else's issues. It's just that we need to look at this issue as what it is, which is something that is systematic, it's structural, it's not just about Black people against Asian people, or vice versa. It's about basically just a system of white supremacy that we've all been indoctrinated into, and that we really need to figure out a way to dismantle.
Yeah, I think and even talking about white supremacy as a global apparatus, we see anti-Blackness even and during this time with COVID, how even, first of all, let's go back with COVID-19. First of all, let's talk
Mm-hmm.
about how Trump called it the Chinese virus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that all of a sudden evoked even more xenophobic racism, right? But we also know that while that has historically been true for Asian Americans and Asian communities and the Asian diaspora in terms of racism and whatnot, we also know that somehow Black communities too also get a major brunt of things as well, because we are viewed as deviant, criminally deviant, exposed to, and same thing in the Asian communities, exposed to disease and deficiency, right? But then also I noticed that when we talk about global white supremacy, even though COVID-19 and Trump was like, oh, this is a China virus, somehow members of the Chinese community wanted to kick out African Americans and Afro descendants in China, or Africans in China, right? And so I think for me as a person who identifies as a Black feminist, and radical, and discussing radical perspectives, if you identify as a radical feminist, you can't be anti-Black. You can't be homophobic. You're not supposed to elicit xenophobia or prejudice. I think we need to decolonize ourselves and constantly decolonize our thinking, because we are co-opted in this system. We are pacified in this white supremacist, capitalist, heteronormative system. So it's like, how do we decolonize, and how do we look at, how can the Asian community look at Black people as not your enemy, and also Black people with Asian folks the same, right? I think it's important to partner with radical folks and radical people in the community. So yeah, that's my little spiel on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. That this is an issue that isn't, just within American borders, but it is something that we definitely see across like the diaspora, because anti-Blackness isn't just an American issue. And that, yeah, what you were mentioning about, like the African migrants in Guangzhou, I believe, where they were basically like kicked out or evicted and really scapegoated for a virus that obviously they had, no cause, that they hadn't caused, and that is something that I see, obviously, and that I try to personally address, and I think that it is very much on Asian communities to address, that our relatives from across the globe, be it that they may, that they are coming from a different perspective, obviously, it's very like nationalist in ways where foreigners are all seen as not, I don't know, like welcome in ways, but that, yeah, there is this like persistent anti-Blackness that I see, that happens within like my family here and my family abroad, and that I make it a goal, though, to talk about these issues and not bury them under the rug, because like the people who do get upset that we bring up these, like people in the Asian American community who do get upset that we talk about them, and that we're not highlighting enough on, let's say, like anti-Asian crime, for example, which, yes, is a thing, but we do need to think about how systematically what does like police brutality look like, or systematically like who gets incarcerated, or who is constantly being disempowered in different ways, and that, yeah, racism isn't just about hate crimes and racial slurs, but it goes further, and that is about this like systematic disempowerment, and that it's about who is left out of policy, and that, yeah, it's something that I think Asian Americans, due to the model minority myth, due to like certain I guess like economic and like career advancement, have been, I feel like, feeling comfortable maybe, and or Asians of certain descent, I'm going to say, because I don't think that this is true for all Asian Americans, but I'm going to say like East Asians who are light skinned, yeah, might feel this like a sense of complacency because of their own advancement perhaps, but that times like these where the racism comes out in a much more in your face way, you're kind of forced to really reckon with racism. And then whenever you talk about racism, you can't talk about it without mentioning how it's impacted so many communities in America that don't look like us.
Definitely. Yeah. I even think about your point when you're talking about someone I saw mention colorism, that there are also two Asians who are of a darker skin, and they might not be Afro descendant necessarily, but there are Afro Asians. There are Asian people who are Black and Asian, like Margot Ogasawa Ray. I mean, there's several intersectional identities, right? And we have to. I think it's so critically important, and everything you were saying, like really, even with family, decolonizing how and speaking up and speaking out, and I think that is a part of our responsibility as articulators of a radical feminist tradition. How are we standing up when it hurts? How are we confronting people in our family? How are we confronting society? How are we confronting ourselves? And so, yeah, this is such an important conversation. And I hope that people take away from that we can be co-opted and absorbed by white supremacist thinking. It's your responsibility to work on that. And if you're indebted to, and if you're indebted to being to Black feminist thought and radical, third world feminist traditions, then you can't claim that legacy and be anti-Black or xenophobic and whatnot. So
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And I appreciate you mentioning, that there are people who identify as Black in the Asian community too, and vice versa, because, I definitely don't mean to erase them by this conversation at all.
no, yeah, you talked about it, and I appreciate you so much, Tiffany. This was a great conversation. And I hope that other people offline continue to build off of it too. And just thank you for being dope as you are.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this platform. I really.
Oh, you lagged away. Oh, are you still there? Okay.
Yeah.
You paused for a second. But yeah, no. Yeah, someone's like, there's Blasians out here. Yes, there are. Yeah. So we're gonna go over to the feminist contextualization of COVID, and we are going to move to that. So thank you, Tiffany.
Bye.
We're going to meet Saloni. Let's see. Let's see, Saloni. I'm trying to find you. Hey, Saloni. We're going to be talking about feminist contextualization of COVID, but I'm going to try to find her account because there's so many people trying to request in. There you are. Cool.
Hey,
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? It's so
I
fun to
am.
hear you all talk.
I know. I'm seeing the messages, and I'm like seeing just everything, and I'm super excited. Like I've been waiting for this combo all day.
Yeah, I actually dreamt about it last night. Yeah, I was
That's
dreaming about
real.
it.
That's real deep. I like that.
It's
So,
intimate, getting intimate.
what is giving you joy right now? Can you also tell folks a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. My name is Saloni. I am one of the co-leaders of the Asian American Feminist Collective. And in my non-collective life, I am a PhD candidate in history. I study the HIV/AIDS epidemic, or the first decades of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, I should say, because it's still very much ongoing. It's with us today, but it's also a historical subject. And what's bringing me joy? Let me think. I've been cooking a lot, and that has
Yeah.
always brought me joy, but I think that this moment has clarified to everyone how valuable domestic labor is and how much the person who like cooks and cleans and plans for the pantry and does all of that stuff is like actually a critical person, and sort of
Mm.
like that acknowledged a world around feels really good and affirming to me. So that's bringing joy.
Well, that's good. And, also that PhD life, girl. I mean,
Yeah.
I know all about it. So I'm glad that you're, doing it
Yeah.
because it's something, I tell you.
Well, I've been reading your notes and just being like, wow, Jamie's so organized and smart. Like, I have to be. It's gold.
It's a
Right.
facade sometimes. It's just, oh my goodness. It's
Yeah.
a mess. I can't wait to be done with that. But anyway, thank you so much for introducing yourself. But I can't wait for you and I to discuss the feminist contextualization of COVID. And so, like I said, Tuesday, BWR had an event on Black feminist perspectives on COVID. So I'm really interested in our conversation as well. So the question I would like to pose is like, how have historical and current racial and economic disparities in general and the lack of public health and access to healthcare specifically exacerbate what we see as these oppressive and fatal encounters with COVID-19 or of COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost, I don't even know where to start because I can't think of a way that they haven't, you know? As we think about this moment and why we've been talking a lot kind of internally as a group and with you too, that there's been this really interesting tension where we've heard so much about anti-Asian racism and then serious disparities when it comes to the Black community in terms of who dies from COVID and which communities are kind of disproportionately affected. And we see so many things. One, you know, Elmhurst, where most of us are New Yorkers here, is so heavily affected because it's this working class place in Queens where people who are still having to work have to go out. And there's been such a disconnect in some of our public health messaging, even in terms of who can stay home, who's allowed to stay home. And it's kind of a privilege to be able to take care of yourself and stay inside, you know, because we have one, enough room, but two, you don't have to go to work. Um, I, I guess, sorry, I'm bubbling over because I've been having so many of these conversations and it feels exciting, but it's also hard because it's the people with kind of pre-existing health disparities that are the hardest hit, people with heart disease or diabetes or who are immunocompromised. And those categories have always fallen on certain communities far more than others, right? Working class communities, poor communities, Black and brown communities. And so I think that when we look at kind of how the epidemic actually takes shape, it falls along the same lines that we see those health disparities with every other health disparity.
Yeah, white supremacy has and continues to do serious damage. And I think about medical apartheid and medical surveillance and even medical skepticism of when it comes to the Black community, because we've been experimented on, Tuskegee experiments. A lot of people, Fannie Lou Hamer had to have a forced sterilization, and she, unbeknownst to her. It's so many layers. Even the genesis of gynecology, J. Marion Sims, when he was practicing illegally on enslaved African women.
Down in New York, which is great.
Yeah.
Just in time, not a moment too soon.
Yes, and we see this, and I'm very concerned in terms of, like, I'm in Chocolate City, I'm in Washington, D.C., and you see a vibrant Black community, but we've seen historically how Black people have been left behind. The Black community has been left behind in terms of access to healthcare, who can get healthcare. Also in Chicago, and we're seeing in Louisiana the high rates of anti-Black death, or in terms of COVID-19, and the carelessness of our government in terms of the responses to it. And we can see, especially when we have this notion of essential workers now, it's like, oh, like you said, we're saying the people who are on the front lines now are being applauded, but beforehand, it's like, who cares about the barista? Who cares about the janitor? Who cares about the folks who clean and whatnot? And it's tiring that, and because their lives are seen. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, and even if we think about essential workers, even after we've acknowledged that they're essential, are they essential or are they sacrificial? Like, do we take care of them? Are we making sure that the way they work is clean and safe? Do they have masks? Are they allowed to get the shifts that they need? Are we paying them enough? And I think I'm a big fan of the 7 p.m. clap that happens in New York. I love it. I think it's important. I think it like helps us connect to each other in a way that we should be connecting, so that when it's over and we start to go back out, we like are on in a community. But I think it's more than just clapping. We have to sort of start paying people to take care of themselves, giving them sick leave, all of those things. And I was also just thinking, listening to you talk, I'm sorry if I interrupted you. Were you in the middle of something?
No, it actually, the screen had froze, so don't worry. It's okay.
Okay, I'm notoriously bad at figuring out what is going on a digital space. But in kind of what I study in the HIV/AIDS epidemic, you know, starting in like 1986, the fastest growing group of people who are HIV positive are Black women in New York, right? And that's earlier than we think. when we think of that timeline. We still think of it as predominantly gay men, but at this point, it really changes, and those women don't get recognized by the medical community until 1994. So you qualify as having AIDS, you don't qualify as eligible for disability, you don't qualify for benefits or services, you can't get into the health clinics you need to. And it is kind of these amazing Black women organizers, predominantly women in prison, Joanna Walker, all of these women who are organizing around access to healthcare and information, did so knowing exactly what you said, that the powers that be are not always vested in giving you the right information that you need. You could be a test, you could be an experiment, you could be a control group. But essentially, we kind of have to make and produce the knowledge that keeps each other safe and keeps our community safe. And it's a profound experience of distrust, right?
It is. And even when you think about the article about all these white doctors talking about testing on folks on Black Africans on the continent, you know what I mean? It always seems as if Black and brown folks, and I'm speaking about the Black community diasporically, as if we're like guinea pigs. And I think when we think of this in a bigger term, I was talking to a friend yesterday, and they talked about genocide by complicity from our government. And I think we need to look at this in terms of genocide. What does this mean, this medical genocide, the inactivity, the inaction of the government to uphold this quote unquote social contract, which never was concerned about those who are oppressed. From a Black diasporic or Black feminist diasporic frame, I think about Black women in Brazil who represent a majority of the domestic work, and they're not getting a stimulus check. And Jair Bolsonaro, the president, doesn't think that COVID is real. And, what about them? What about Black women who are a part of the largest diaspora location in the world, which is Brazil? How are they faring during this time? And also in terms of enslavement, the histories of enslavement, medical experimentation, and more. So I really think that these feminist contextualizations of COVID speak to who can be productive, who is not, who is considered essential, who is the underbelly, all sorts of points.
Or who's considered kind of deserving of their illness or casualty, kind of, fodder for our society moving on. I've been struck a lot about, in this conversation about anti-blackness in the Asian American community or model minority myths, I do think that part of it is who we as a community have cast out as undeserving of our kind of full advocacy. And those are sex workers, those are drug users, those are people who are on the street who not looking out for. And so I think in sort of trying to align ourselves with certain projects of white supremacy, we've really left a whole lot of people in the Asian American community out as well. And kind of being in solidarity with both those people and kind of people of color more broadly requires a real reckoning with like, what is a radical politics and who counts in your politics? Like who gets to matter?
Yeah, no, you're definitely right. I also think of like the disabled community has been rallying so long for certain access that we have now in terms of working from home, and amongst other things. And now all of a sudden when there's a, COVID-19, a pandemic, but also a capitalist crisis, because, you can't exploit the masses, the proletariat like you want to. And now all of a sudden these, oh, you can work from home now, you can do this and you can do that. But what about disabled folks who were advancing this whole entire time? And so I think that goes to your point too, because and even with sex work, like you mentioned, it's a whole, we really have to look at who Kathy Cohen, a Black lesbian scholar, talks about as the advanced marginalization, right? And who has done a lot of work on HIV/AIDS too in the Black community. Yeah.
What is the article? Punks, Bulldaggers, and
Welfare Queens.
Welfare Queens.
Yeah.
Like favorite, most formative text for my whole dissertation about kind of like thinking through what queer could mean if we, expand this whole idea. And really quickly, I know we probably are out of time, but you had mentioned on our doc, and I was thinking about this so much, but maternal health is such a huge
Yes.
place where we see that kind of disparity play out. And I was just reading about a young woman in the Bronx who I wish I remembered her name, who just passed away, who kind of predicted it because she'd been reading so much about how Black women are really underserved by our healthcare systems, and most likely to die. I think they're 8 times more likely to die than white women in maternity wards in New York City, which is wild.
Yeah.
So folks are looking for reading recommendations. Killing the Black Body by Dorothy Roberts, so important, so kind of formative to this thinking. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm blank
We're gonna have to
now.
do a book list, but it
Yeah.
was so great talk. Yeah, punks, bulldaggers, and welfare queens, a radical potential queer politics. But this was such a dope conversation. I appreciate
Yes.
you,
I
Doctor.
do. Almost.
Listen, we're almost there, but we are going to transition to Julie so we
Okay.
can have this amazing conversation on racial disparities of COVID and just have a cool dialogue.
Awesome. All right. See you soon. Bye.
Bye. Let's see. Let me find Julie. There you are. Yeah, we do need a book list, y'all. We need this book list. Hey, Julie.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you? What's going on?
Good, good. Just tuning into the IG Live with all of you all.
Yeah, this is fun. I'm happy right now. This is great, and a lot of people are enjoying it. So, Julie, can you tell folks a little bit about yourself and what is giving you joy right now?
Yeah, so I'm Julie. I'm with the AFC, and what's giving me joy right now, honestly, like the other day, I was talking to my mom. I'm from Flushing, Queens, like Bayside, Queens, and she was telling me about how she has been doing food distribution. And she's just been doing it through her own networks that she knows and through her local church. And she speaks very little English, and it reminded me of how resilient our immigrant communities are, even without, the help of the government or people coming in to, be like saviors almost sometimes and coming into communities and offering help, but seeing how she and her community has been rallying together to do that has been really inspiring for me.
That I said all because I remember seeing you tweeting about it on your
Oh
Twitter.
yeah. Yeah.
So that's so wonderful. Like the resilience of our mothers, the resilience of our foremothers speaks a lot to the resilience that we have now. So yeah, like I'm super excited to speak with you about the material impact of COVID in terms of racial disparities and also what we are seeing on the ground from our respective community groups around COVID. Yeah, so let's get into it.
Yeah, so I feel like the first thing that comes to mind when we think about racial disparity is the official, mortality rate that is published by the DOHMH, like Department of Health, or through our city government. And those statistics, have shown that for Black and Brown people have been the largest mortality rates, where Asians in New York City was shown to be around 7%. And then it came out that they actually didn't count people who, one, didn't go to the hospital or died in their homes or did not get a test. So when we really think about the official statistics as well, a lot of Asian, I mean, all across all different communities, there's all the undocumented immigrants who are afraid to even go to the hospital, to even get tested and won't even be a part of these statistics. There were even a case that I saw of someone who was South Asian being marked as Caucasian, right? So like, how can we actually even trust if our communities are even being counted during this time? And as I was thinking about that, thinking about who are the people, serving on the front lines and what Saloni was talking about, like being sacrificial, I thought that was really great in terms of like, and all other aspects you don't even think about. Essential workers or frontline workers, people who are working in the bodegas, at the laundromats, dry cleaners, MTA workers. But now, because they're basically on the front lines of, protecting or like, having to work through this, they're now considered a hero.
Mm.
And then the problematics of calling these frontline workers or essential workers heroes too, like dissecting that. Another thing I've been thinking about, just like what I've been seeing in New York City and thinking about was I saw this meme on Twitter about Parasite there is like this scene where the wealthy mom, you know, it's raining really hard, like goes, like looks at the rain and says, "Oh, it's such a blessing. It's a blessing in disguise." Whereas like all these people who are living in the basements are like it's like flooding. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
that's sometimes what I think about when I think about this pandemic, because, you know, for folks who can stay at home and are working from home and are saying things like, "Oh, it's a blessing in disguise," like, you know, maybe this is what we needed, you know, instead of like, but like people who are on the front lines, like people who are living like in homes that don't have a backyard or a pool, or, you know, don't have space, like it just makes me realize like privilege, and just thinking about privilege and rest and productivity, all the things that we were also talking about the other day,
Yeah.
Jamie.
Yeah, and yo, we were talking about that, and I kind of get a little deep in my comments on the doc that we had. But no, I agree. I think you see who it's so interesting how like the white supremacist capitalist apparatus will like switch up and assign certain functions to whom at what time, like the process of racialization or racial formations. But like now, they're using essential workers as props. Like, oh, thank you so much, but beforehand, it's just like you know. I've walked into stores and had to confront people who, you know, come in and want to talk down to baristas, talk down to workers. Like the people in my family come from working class, at one time very much so working poor,
Hmm.
and worked as janitors and cleaners and whatnot. And like my grandmom sharecropping in Arkansas after her mother had a heart attack on the sharecropping. And so it's like, now all of a sudden my labor is seen as a prize, or should be propped up. But what's going to happen after this? So for me, and what I've been talking about with a lot of Black feminists, like in the event we had on Tuesday, what will post COVID, what will this new normal, quote unquote, look like for particularly for Black people? And I was talking to a sister, her name is Doriana Diaz, and she was saying like, we Black people have already been separated from enslavement, from like, you know, as a Black American, in terms of connecting to our roots. And then we've always used healing, community, and communion as a source of resilience, right? So what will that mean post COVID? Will I have to hug you with the mask on? Can I hug you? Can I touch you? Um,
I
how can
mean,
all sorts of things.
I think thinking about post-COVID is important because one, I think benefit or thing that is happening is we are seeing what needs to change and just seeing how broken the system is. And we need to make sure that after COVID is over, it's not just this is what happened, right? It's we have to think about how we are going to be utilizing, you know, our experiences now to advocate for the future and advocate for Medicare for all, or, you know, working from home even. You know what I mean? Like I was just thinking about like how people are so against, like how employers are so against giving autonomy to workers sometimes, and just hoping that at least something that can come out of this is organizing for a better future.
Definitely. And also, I forgot to, and I'm forgive me for being remiss. Let's talk about incarcerated folks who the state has relegated to inhumanity already. But you know, they're not getting COVID-19 access in terms of healthcare and health equity. And we already know that the prisons are and jails are overpopulated with Black folks. And so, what about prison abolition? I saw Nena from BYP 100, No New Jails, Black Lives Matter DC, Decrim Now in terms of decriminalization of sex work,
Hmm.
all sorts of these amazing grassroots organizations who've been advocating for these things for so long. And so what does that mean? How do we transform this space? And also with us working together, this can't be just a one-time event. We have to continue to build to see the world and transform the world that we want. And it is possible.
Yeah,
We
the
just,
one last thing like that I would want to say is I think for a lot of Asian Americans who are feeling anti-Asian racism and xenophobia, you know, when our automatic reaction could be anxiety and fear and acting out of fear. But we are seeing that instead of acting out of fear, how can we act out of love and solidarity to each other and utilize how we're experiencing this right now to build coalitions and build solidarities? You know, I think that is something that should come out of this. And I love that we're having this conversation today.
I know, and we can go on and on and on, and we have to do this in person after this, whatever happens from this. But we will meet in person, and we will continue this fight in terms of organizing and working together and learning from one another. So thank you, Julie.
Bye.
Bye. Ciao. Let's see. We are going to have Senti speak on futures. I'm super excited about, we were talking with Julie about it a little bit, but what are ways to really enact solidarity in praxis? Let me see, where is Senti? There's so many people wanting to, there you go, Senti, I see you.
Hey!
Hi, ooh, look at that red lip. Ooh.
I had to dress up for you.
I love it. I love it. I love it. It looks really great. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for reaching out. It's been just like such a thrill to hear everybody talk about all these really pressing issues. So thank you for bringing us together.
Oh, no, thank you for y'all for saying yes. This is super exciting. I can't believe the hour is almost up. We could keep going. But yeah, Senti, tell the folks, watching a little bit about you and what's giving you joy.
Yeah, what is bringing me joy? One thing that really is public radio. You know, when I listen to like Brian Lehrer in the morning and New Yorkers call in with their questions and sharing their experiences about the crisis, it's just feels so intimate. Like I love being able to hear the voices of other New Yorkers and sort of feel like we can be in communion in that way because we can't physically be together. So I feel like that's something that's making me really happy.
Well, that's so cool. That is so sweet. Yeah, that's awesome. I think that I'm really excited. I know you're the last person I'm going to talk to, but I'm really excited to talk about futures. What are ways that we can build solidarities between the Black and Asian American feminist communities? And I just would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course. So, I think that as we've spoken about, this is both a really personal and a really large scale crisis. We can find, I think, like so much of the joy and comfort that we really need in this moment through building radical, revolutionary feminist solidarities. I think that like as so many of my colleagues have spoken about, like the world is really understanding a lot of what feminists have been talking about for a long time through this crisis. How we really need a full-scale reevaluation of how we think about care, how we think about whose work is essential, whose lives have value. And I think that solidarity really depends on how we come together and is defined by how we understand and enact our responsibilities and relationships with one another. So, historically in Marxist theory, solidarity was conceptualized as an expression of the shared experience and specific political needs of the working class to really think about the fact that we're always stronger together and that collective action is the only way that we can have real wins for our communities. And I'm so happy that you brought up Audre Lorde earlier. She's definitely one of my all-time favorites. And, she always said that none of us are free until we're all free. So what does that actually mean when we think about the work that we're doing together right now? I think that solidarity requires us to ask ourselves, what are my privileges? How can I use them for other people? What does it mean to take up space? How can I learn about when I should be taking up space and when I should be relinquishing it? How can I use my voice to amplify the voices of others? And fundamentally, I think solidarity really means that we understand that we don't necessarily have to have a personal relationship to a person or cause to take up action against what oppresses them. And I think that solidarity also means really thinking about the fact that we're not all equally impacted by injustice just because we're people of color. But it means that we can honor our differences and we can examine that nuance and live in it while we also say our struggles are intertwined inherently always. And I think that we're seeing so much of that solidarity happen right now, like through the COVID-19 crisis. We're seeing things like the rise of mutual aid funds. We're seeing rent strikes. We're seeing people donating their stimulus checks to people who need them. We're really seeing collective action and practice right now. And I think a lot of people are encountering these ideas for the first time. And I think that that's something that's giving me a lot of joy and hope in this moment that can sometimes feel so debilitating and so hard for so many of us.
Yeah, literally we're all we got at this point. And a great example, I had talked to April and Makia from Black Lives Matter DC, and they're part of a mutual aid coalition in DC. And, you know, the mayor of DC was using their number to connect, pretending as if she was giving services to the community, but it was really Black Lives Matter DC and amongst other these radical organizations, Black radical organizations in DC, really doing the mutual aid project. And it's like, the state will not save us. And I think now more than ever, we need to really discuss our issues between one another and really rally together, because when all else fails, Crew Make Do from Black Lesbian Archive says, if we don't have Instagram, we don't have Facebook, we don't have Twitter, what do we have? We have each other, right? And so I think that's really important to discuss. If all this is kept away, we have to remember solidarity, not just as a theory, but as an acting everyday practice of, and also decolonizing ourselves as well, if we want to decolonize and radically transform this world. So I also think it requires reading. It requires working together. It requires really being invested in our histories and the histories of the radical tradition in our respective communities too. So yeah. I'm all for
100%. And I also think that what this moment has also given us is that, like, we have the ability to work together and also imagine like utopian futures for our communities, right? Like, I think that as activists, we're always told that our dreams are too big. The kinds of actions that we want to see are too much. Like, we saw that so much with like the Bernie Sanders campaign, right? Like, so many of the things that he was talking about and what his movement was fighting for, people were continually being told like, it's too much, we're not ready. But I really love like the idea of thinking about the way we work in solidarity is also an opportunity for us to imagine and create the kind of futures that our people deserve. And I think it's a creative practice. I think that it's a practice of imagination and one of love. And at the end of the day, like, that's what solidarity really means. It means love for other people. It means understanding that we're all in this together and that there's really no future that we can have that's sustainable and real without collective liberation and action.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of when I think of radical and radicality, I want my people to be free. And like the Combahee River Collective statement, if Black women are free, then all people are going to be free, you know? And so I want us to really recognize that too. It's about love. It's about, and it's not always going to be perfect and flowery, right? Like, we're going to go through some crap. We have, but it's like, how do we really navigate that? How do we stay committed and dedicated to the cause, constantly growing, learning, failing, getting back up again, and doing it all over again? And so that takes commitment, that takes accountability, that takes some sort of structure. It takes a lot of things. And so I'm like, if you're really dedicated to solidarity and transformation, you will do what is necessary to catalyze that and create that for yourself and for others too.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think like this conversation is solidarity in action, you know, like this is us learning from one another, educating one another, talking about what our communities are going through. Like, this is the first step. Solidarity is about relationships. And I'm so thankful to you for helping us have this conversation so that we can really start building that solidarity together.
Yeah, I'm grateful. I can't believe the hour is up. Like it says, it's giving me an hour and 24 minutes, but thank you, Asian American Feminist Collective. Y'all are popping. Senti, thank you. Julie, Saloni, Rachel, Julie. Did I forget anybody? Tiffany. Thank you so much. This was great. And everyone, thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.
And we appreciate
Thanks so much for coming.
All right. Ciao.